Please remember to put your cell phones at the front before we begin learning about the progressive era, which is sushi number 13. However, we are going to discuss the Gilded Age first. The Gilded Age was from the 1870s to the 1900s. It was a period of reconstruction after the Civil War and transforming the economy into technological, social, and a more government-controlled establishment. Now that we've had a brief discussion of the Gilded Age, we can move on to the progressive era, starting with Theodore Roosevelt. Whoa! Woo! Everybody clap.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Theodore Roosevelt, and I coined the term muckraker, which was used to categorize American journalists who attacked established institutions and leaders of corruption. Thank you.
All right, class. Now we're going to move on to Upton Sinclair.
Hello, guys. My name is Upton Sinclair, and I'm one of the famous muckrakers that Theodore Roosevelt was talking about. I am mainly known for my hit novel, The Jungle, which focused on unsanitary working conditions in the Chicago meatpacking industry. After I published this book, massive uproar took place around the nation, which later made the United States government enact the Meat Inspection Act of 1906, which meant that now the sale of misbranded livestock was deemed illegal, and that every meat product that had been ensured that it was under proper sanitation conditions. Due to this, the FDA was formed to monitor the produce facilities to make sure they were complying with federal law. Thank you.
Thank you, Upton Sinclair. Now we're going to introduce Ida Tarbell. Woo! So,
hello, my name is Ida Tarbell, and I'm another famous muckraker that was mainly known for the history of Standard Oil, which was a series of articles exposing the Standard Oil Company and their shady practices between 1902 and 1904. I gathered information on the Standard Oil Company by researching public records, newspaper articles, and interviewing former employees. I guess you can ask, why would I even do this? Well, I'll tell you all about it. It's because the Standard Oil Company ran my father out of business through shady business practices, which made me very upset. This was one of the first forms of, did you know that this was one of the first forms of investigative journalism, which ultimately led to the government stepping in and breaking up the Standard Oil Company and so many different companies that we now have today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ida Tarbell, for talking to the class. Now we're going to introduce Jacob Reese. Woo!
Hey y'all, my name is Jacob Reese, and I'm another famous muckraker that was mostly known for exposing the hazardous living conditions of New York City in the early 1900s. The document that I am most known for is called How the Other Half Lives, which talks about the unhealthy tenant housing in the city of New York and the unsanitary streets of New York that were mostly immigrant neighborhoods. My work led to the New York City Hall enacting the Department of Sanitation, which led to the city providing sewage and water services to the residents and a total redo of the urban housing. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Jacob Reese. All right, guys. Let's get into the implication of women's rights. Many middle-class women received education in the middle of the 19th century. Even with their new education, they were still shown as nurturers and agents of stability. Women used this to advocate for social change, which includes the reborn temperance movement, women's suffrage, sanitation, educational reforms, and attacks on racism. Now we will introduce Miss Jane Addams. You! Hey guys! Thank you for having me here, Mr. Tilson. I am Jane Addams, and I had a major role to improve the lives of the urban poor. Those were mainly immigrant women and children that was forced to work and live in the dangerous and unhealthy conditions. I founded the settlement house movement, which began in urban England to help the poor by securing donations from the wealthy. I created the settlement house in Chicago. I then founded the Whole House in 1889 to provide opportunities for immigrants to receive an education, especially women. By 1983, we were serving about 2,000 clients. Isn't that just wonderful, helping all those people? I advocated for legislative reforms in municipal, state, and federal levels. I introduced these issues as child labor, healthcare, and immigration. I later got involved in women's suffrage, and I was a proud charter member of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jane Addams. That was very eye-opening, seeing the huge significance for immigrants and women's rights. For our next topic, we are going to touch on the Jim Crow laws a little bit. The Jim Crow laws were 10 of the 11 former Confederate states that created a legal framework for separating whites and blacks. The initial purpose for these laws were to prevent blacks from participating in the political process. That included voting, serving in the office, and even participating in jury trials. The laws were intended to include public education, transportation, and other public facilities. They kept whites and blacks separate, meaning they couldn't use the same water fountains, restrooms, and more. This was initially created by the states, but was extended to the federal government. In 1890, Louisiana passed another law that required separate facilities on railroads. Enough of the Jim Crow laws, because now we have to introduce our next guest, Homer Plessy. Thank you for welcoming me into this discussion for your class, Mr. Tilson. As you know, everyone, my name is Homer Plessy, and I was a part of the Plessy versus Ferguson case with Judge John Howard Ferguson. In 1892, I wanted to challenge the law. I'm an eighth black, and it met the period's prevailing legal definition of race. However, I could visually pass as a white man. I got arrested because I refused to get off a whites-only railroad car. My case went through the judicial system to the Supreme Court. In 1896, the Supreme Court started my Plessy versus Ferguson case that stated separated but equal was unconditional. The Supreme Court affirmed the state-level segregation of the Jim Crow laws. Then conditions got worse down in the South. Blacks were seeking for safety, social equality, and fair hiring practices. It was unbelievable of how these conditions were for the separation of races. However, on that note, that concludes my Plessy versus Ferguson case. Thank you for your time. Thanks, Homer Plessy. Our next upcoming topic is about the NAACP. Does anybody know what the NAACP stands for? No? Well, it stands for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. It was created in 1909 by W.E.B. Du Bois. The NAACP began to challenge the Jim Crow laws and lynching through the courts, and it was successful in the South. The reputation of the NAACP went until 1954, ending the public school segregation. Woo! Our last topic for today is about progressivism. In the progressive era, it emerged in the early 1900s to improve American democracy, achieve social and economic stability, and crack down on corruption. The Progressive Party was mostly middle class. Their goals consisted of creating new procedures to enable more political participation, more government regulation, empower voters, protect consumers, and the environment. They made numerous reforms in the state, local, and federal levels. The main federal reform of the Progressive Era was the 17th Amendment. It gave ways to direct elections for senators, and there was more political power given to the voters. The recall vote provision allowed voters to remove any politician they were unsatisfied with. Each new political reform gave more power to the people. There were new labor laws such as child labor with a minimum age, and they restricted the type of jobs children were allowed to have. There were new labor laws for women set at a minimum wage and maximum amount of hours they could work. Business owners were required to ensure health, safety, and sanitation. Worker compensation laws were also issued. Alright everybody, that concludes our presentations for SSUSH number 13, which is the Progressive Reform Era. So, what I'd like everyone to do is to clap their hands and give a round of applause for our guests for coming in today to explaining the Reform Era. Come on out, guys. If y'all don't shut up. Is that Goodwill?
Yeah.
That's Goodwill?
Yeah.
I never.
You didn't know that?
No. I thought it was just donation
Don't
center.
Don't you go to school?
The 1800s to the 1900s, okay? It was a period of Reconstruction after the Civil War and transforming
No. 1870s to 1900.
That's what I
You
said.
said 1800s to 1900.
I did?
Yeah.
I did?
Yeah, you said
Oh my
you
God.
said silver.
I quit.
To make sure.
That just made me mad. That just made